Imagine a bustling zoo, alive with the chatter of families and the excitement of children marveling at animals behind seemingly secure barriers. Yet for 8-year-old Anya, that illusion of safety would soon be shattered. Startled by a commotion near the bear enclosure, she leaned forward instinctively just as a massive bear lunged. What happened after was too horrifying to describe. It was a crisp September day in 1999. And the bustling Velican Zoo in Norilsk was alive with families eager to see its exotic residents. Among the visitors was Natalia, a young mother bringing her 3 children to the zoo for the first time. Her oldest daughter, 8-year-old Anya, had been looking forward to the trip for weeks. For Anya, the idea of seeing bears, tigers, and giraffes up close was the most exciting adventure she could imagine. But what began as a day of laughter and awe quickly turned into a mother's worst nightmare. Anya was a bright and curious child with a love for animals and a flair for creativity. She spent hours drawing pictures of lions, elephants, and other creatures she'd only seen in books, dreaming of the day she might see them in person. Her room was filled with crayon sketches of her favorite animals, proudly taped to the walls. A budding artist with a vivid imagination, Anya often told her mother she wanted to become a zookeeper or wildlife photographer when she grew up. A trip to the Velican Zoo was meant to be a belated celebration of her recent birthday, an opportunity for her to experience the animals she adored so much up close. For weeks, she had eagerly counted down the days, planning to take her sketchbook along to capture her favorite moments. The Velican Zoo was a popular destination, but notorious for its poorly designed enclosures and lax safety measures. Most of the large carnivores, including bears, were housed in open pits with low concrete walls. Visitors stood on raised platforms just 10 feet above the animals, separated by wide metal railings that offered little protection. Children often leaned through the bars for a better view, an action the zoo's sparse security staff struggled to monitor. The reliance on faith that well-fed animals wouldn't attack left visitors dangerously exposed, a flaw that would have devastating consequences. Natalia guided her children through the zoo, marveling at the variety of animals. Anya beamed with excitement as they visited the giraffes and ostriches. She laughed as her younger twin brothers, Alexei and Ivan, chased geese in the petting zoo, only to cry when the birds turned aggressive. By the time they reached the bear enclosure, the twins were getting cranky, but Anya was entranced by the sight of playful bear cubs wrestling below. The bear enclosure housed several black bears, their dark coats blending into the shadowy corners of the pit. 2 playful cubs tumbled near the center, their small forms contrasting sharply with the imposing bulk of the larger adults prowling the edges. Anya still had a handful of food pellets left from feeding the giraffes earlier. She moved closer to the railing, drawn by the cubs' playful antics. Leaning over slightly, she tossed the pellets into the enclosure, watching as the cubs eagerly sniffed the ground and gobbled up the treats. Their excitement brought a smile to her face as she remained focused on the bears below. Just a few feet away, a boy leaned dangerously far through the bars, shouting at the bears and tossing small rocks. His taunts were met with agitated pacing from one of the adult bears, which began moving restlessly near the wall of the enclosure. Its sharp claws scraped against the concrete, its movements growing more erratic. A security guard intervened, scolding the boy and dragging him away. But as he was pulled back, the boy shouted one loud jeer, the noise echoing sharply across the pit. Startled by the sudden sound, Anya instinctively leaned forward to see what had happened, unaware of the danger now locked onto her. The startled bear reacted instantly. With a powerful leap, it scaled part of the wall, its massive paw swiping toward the commotion. The blow struck Anya, its claws slashing across her face and neck. Screaming, she lost her balance and toppled into the enclosure, landing with a sickening thud on the concrete floor below. Disoriented and bleeding, Anya struggled to stand, unaware of the danger closing in. The adult bear, enraged by the earlier disturbance, charged toward her. Before she could move, it slammed her to the ground, its jaws locking around her head. The sheer force of the attack broke her neck, killing her instantly. Another bear joined in, tearing at her lifeless body as the crowd above screamed in horror. Natalia, hearing the commotion, rushed toward the enclosure with her twins in tow. Pushing through the panicked crowd, she arrived just as zookeepers fired on the attacking bear. The initial shots seemed to have little effect, the massive animal refusing to release its grip on Anya's remains. Only after several more rounds did the bear finally collapse, its jaws still locked onto her lifeless body. Staff had to pry Anya's remains from the bear's powerful grip as Natalia fell to her knees, screaming in anguish at the sight of the bloodied scraps of the purple jacket Anya had proudly worn that morning. The attack horrified the other visitors, plunging the area into chaos. Panicked visitors fled in hysteria, some screaming for help while others frantically shielded their children from the terrifying scene. A few bystanders, desperate to intervene, attempted to climb over the railings to reach Anya, only to be restrained by security guards. Zookeepers worked frantically to regain control, their shouts drowned out by the commotion. The second bear, agitated by the chaos, was shot moments later, its lifeless body collapsing near the blood-soaked pit. In the aftermath, the zoo scrambled to address the public outcry. The bear enclosure was closed indefinitely, and officials announced plans to implement sweeping changes, including deeper enclosures and reinforced barriers. However, these measures failed to ease concerns entirely, as many questioned whether such changes could truly eliminate the risks posed by the zoo's outdated infrastructure and lax oversight. Even today, similar facilities around the world continue to operate with glaring vulnerabilities, where the illusion of safety can shatter in an instant, leaving devastation in its wake. But not every tragedy stems from innocence. Sometimes danger is sought out, boundaries are crossed, and the balance tips into chaos. For 11-year-old Juan, what began as a daring stunt to impress his friends at Brooklyn's Prospect Park Zoo spiraled into a horrific encounter that defied every warning and ended up in unimaginable terror. It was a warm evening in May 1987, and the sun had just set over Brooklyn. As the city bustled with its usual energy, the Prospect Park Zoo grew quiet. Visitors had cleared out, the gates were locked, and the zoo's security staff began their nightly patrols. But outside the perimeter, 3 boys were planning an adventure that would shatter the quiet and leave a dark scar on the zoo's history. Juan Perez, an 11-year-old boy from Brooklyn, was the leader of the group. A daring and energetic child, Juan had a knack for convincing his friends to join him in his risky ideas. That night, the boys had set out on a dare to sneak into the zoo and swim in the seal enclosure. It was a challenge born from mischief and youthful excitement, but one that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The Prospect Park Zoo, established in the 1930s, had long been criticized for its outdated enclosures. Many of the animals were housed in pit-like exhibits, with little to no environmental enrichment. The polar bear enclosure, home to 2 massive bears named Teddy and Lucy, was no exception. Surrounded by a moat and enclosed by wrought iron fences, the exhibit was meant to keep the bears in, but not necessarily to keep intruders out. As the boys circled the zoo's perimeter, they found a gap in the fencing just large enough to squeeze through. They crawled under the wire and crept into the quiet zoo, their giggles stifled by the thrill of sneaking around. Their original plan was to head to the seal exhibit, but the sight of the polar bear enclosure drew their attention. To the boys, it was the ultimate challenge. Swimming in the polar bear moat would make for a story no one else could tell. Juan, eager to prove his bravery, was the first to climb the tall iron fence surrounding the polar bear exhibit. He tossed their clothes over the bars, declaring there was no turning back now. As he tethered on to the top, his friends hesitated, watching nervously from the ground. Ultimately, neither followed him into the enclosure, leaving Juan to climb down alone. Landing on the concrete floor, he stood for a moment taking in his surroundings before his friends urged him on toward the moat. The enclosure was quiet at first, the polar bears nowhere to be seen. But as Juan waded into the cold moat, the commotion roused the enclosure's residents. Teddy, a 1,200-pound male polar bear, and Lucy, a 900-pound female, stirred from their den. Lifting their heads, they sniffed the air, detecting the unfamiliar scent of the intruders. As Juan climbed out of the water on the far side of the moat, Teddy emerged from the shadows. The massive bear began to move, its lumbering gait deceptively slow but purposeful. Juan froze as the bear approached, its head swinging side to side, its powerful paws pressing into the ground. Before he could react, Teddy lunged. The bear's massive jaws clamped onto Juan, shaking him violently as his friends screamed in terror. The zoo was closed for the evening and no staff were present to witness the attack. After the two boys fled the scene in terror, they ran home and told their parents what had happened. The parents immediately contacted the police, who arrived at the zoo with emergency responders. By the time the officers arrived at the scene, the bears were fighting over Juan's remains near the entrance to their den. Fearing that other children might also be in the enclosure, the officers made the difficult decision to shoot the bears. It took over 20 shots, including blasts from shotguns and revolvers, to bring down the two massive animals. Once the bears were subdued, officers and zoo staff searched the enclosure but found no other victims. The incident sparked outrage and protests over the killing of the bears. Critics pointed to the zoo's outdated design and lack of security as contributing factors. The tragedy also brought long overdue attention to the poor conditions in which the animals were kept. In the years that followed, the Prospect Park Zoo was closed for renovations. By 1993, it reopened as the Prospect Park Wildlife Conservation Center, featuring modern enclosures and a new focus on education and conservation. The tragedy at Prospect Park Zoo became a defining moment in rethinking the purpose of zoos worldwide. What had once been spaces focused solely on entertainment began to shift toward conservation, education, and ethical animal care. Many institutions felt the push to redesign enclosures with safety and the animals' well-being in mind, transforming zoos from outdated spectacles into centers for preservation and learning. This evolution not only redefined the visitor experience, but also showed a shared responsibility to protect and respect the natural world. When humans enter the domain of wild animals, the results can be catastrophic. But what happens when the roles reverse, when the animals cross the line into human territory? At a wildlife reserve in South Africa, a single mistake left a gate unlatched, unleashing a predator into a space it was never meant to roam, with devastating consequences. It was a peaceful morning on March 18, 2017, in South Africa's Free State province. The sun rose steadily over the sprawling grounds of the Tiger Canyon Wildlife Reserve, casting a warm glow across the savanna. 3-year-old Jacob Peters Jr., with his bright blonde hair and infectious curiosity, was already outside, absorbed in a game with his favorite toy trucks. Jacob was the heart of his family, a lively and adventurous child who loved spending time outdoors. For the Peters, life on the reserve was a perfect mix of work and nature, but that morning would take a deadly turn no one could have foreseen. Tiger Canyon, established as a pioneering wildlife reserve, was renowned for its innovative approach to big cat conservation. Located in South Africa's Free State province, the reserve was a brainchild of acclaimed filmmaker and conservationist John Vardy. Initially founded to support the conservation of Bengal tigers, an endangered species native to Asia, the reserve soon expanded its efforts to house and protect a variety of big cats. Lions, leopards, and cheetahs found refuge within its sprawling, meticulously designed enclosures, which stretched across hundreds of acres. Tiger Canyon became a global leader in blending conservation and ecotourism, drawing visitors from around the world to witness these majestic creatures in semi-wild conditions. The reserve prided itself on its commitment to safety, employing strict protocols and advanced enclosure designs to minimize risks for both animals and humans. However, the events of the previous night revealed the fragility of even the most carefully maintained systems. During an informal after-hours gathering involving staff and visitors, a critical mistake was made. One staff member tasked with retrieving supplies late in the evening failed to properly latch the gate to the cheetah enclosure. Though the gate appeared closed, it was left unsecured, allowing one of the reserve's cheetahs to push it open and venture beyond the confines of its habitat. Unnoticed in the darkness, the animal roamed freely across the grounds, its instincts sharpening as the night wore on. By morning, the predator was dangerously close to the human-occupied areas, setting the stage for a devastating encounter. As Jacob Sr., the father, left to feed the tigers on the other side of the reserve, Sophie Peters prepared breakfast in the kitchen, leaving her young son to play on the grass outside their bungalow. The family, familiar with the routine safety of the reserve, had no reason to suspect any danger. Meanwhile, the escaped cheetah, curious and driven by instinct, prowled the grounds unnoticed. Its sharp senses led it toward the sounds and smells of human activity, and its gaze fell on Jacob Jr., who was happily engrossed in his game. The cheetah approached silently, its movements calculated and precise. Jacob, unaware of the predator closing in, continued to push his toy truck through the dirt, singing softly to himself. With a sudden leap, the cheetah pounced, pinning the boy to the ground. Its claws sank into his small frame and its powerful jaws clamped onto his neck. Jacob screamed, the sound cutting through the quiet morning air. Sophie, hearing her son's cries, rushed outside. What she saw stopped her cold. The cheetah was on top of her son, its jaws locked around his neck. She screamed for help as she ran toward them, her heart pounding in terror. A nearby gardener, alerted by her cries, sprinted to intervene. Without hesitation, he grabbed the cheetah, managing to force it off the child. The cheetah snarled and resisted, but eventually fled into the bushes, disappearing from sight. Jacob lay on the ground, blood pooling around him. Sophie knelt beside him, desperately applying pressure to his wounds to stop the bleeding. The gardener called for emergency assistance, and within minutes a helicopter arrived to airlift Jacob to a hospital in Bloemfontein, the nearest city with advanced medical facilities. At the hospital in Bloemfontein, doctors and nurses immediately began treating Jacob's severe injuries. The most critical wound, inflicted by the cheetah's powerful jaws, had caused extensive damage to his neck, severing vital arteries and cutting off oxygen to his brain. Despite intubation and efforts to stabilize him, the trauma had already caused irreversible brain damage. Over 48 agonizing hours, the Peters stayed by Jacob's side as specialists worked tirelessly, though his condition showed no signs of improvement. The lack of oxygen had caused severe brain swelling, leaving no hope for recovery. On the third day, the family made the heartbreaking decision to remove him from life support. Surrounded by his grieving parents, Jacob passed away peacefully, leaving behind a family forever changed by the preventable tragedy. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Tiger Canyon implemented stricter safety measures, ensuring that all enclosures were secured with spring-loaded latches. The staff member responsible for the unlatched gate faced disciplinary action and was later charged with involuntary manslaughter, but avoided imprisonment due to the unintentional nature of the oversight. The Peters, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss, left the reserve. For them, Tiger Canyon would forever be associated with the tragic death of their beloved son. Jacob's tragic encounter showed the devastating consequences of a single mistake in a controlled environment. In Sweden, however, no mistake was made. All protocols were followed, every precaution taken, yet the strength and cunning of a determined predator turned a routine day into a horrifying battle for survival. This is the story of Sven, a young zookeeper who faced the fury of a brown bear. It was a clear summer morning on August 4, 2017 at Orsa Rovdjurspark, Scandinavia's largest predator park, tucked away in the serene wilderness of Sweden. Known for its spacious enclosures and an impressive collection of predators like brown bears, wolves, and lynxes, the park offered visitors a rare glimpse into the lives of these majestic creatures. The sprawling reserve prided itself on its reputation for safety, boasting well-maintained enclosures and strict protocols for its staff. However, that reputation would be irreversibly tarnished after a tragic event that would claim the life of a young zookeeper. Among the park's dedicated employees was Sven, a 19-year-old who had recently joined the team. Fresh out of school, Sven was eager to pursue his passion for wildlife. His ultimate dream was to work as a zoologist or veterinarian, and this job was his first step toward that goal. Sven was known among his colleagues for his enthusiasm, hard-working nature, and genuine affection for the animals under his care. Despite being new to the role, he was trusted with routine tasks and had quickly become a valued member of the team. That morning, Sven had been assigned the task of cleaning the brown bear enclosure. While it wasn't the most glamorous job, Sven approached it with his usual diligence. The park's brown bear enclosure was one of its most prominent attractions, housing the powerful predators in a large wooded habitat designed to mimic their natural environment. To ensure safety during cleaning, the bears were routinely lured into a smaller holding pen attached to the main enclosure. This procedure allowed staff to work without fear of coming into direct contact with the animals. The system had worked without incident for years, and all protocols were followed that day. As Sven entered the enclosure, the bears had already been locked in the holding area where they were distracted with food. Unbeknownst to anyone, however, one of the bears had been digging near the edge of its holding pen. Over time, the animal had created a tunnel under the fence, just large enough for it to squeeze through. The digging had gone unnoticed during routine checks, and no one suspected that the fence, which extended a few feet underground, could be compromised. Sven worked methodically, shoveling debris and tidying up the space. The enclosure was in disarray after days of the bears' restless pacing, their nervous energy a sign of the approaching autumn. Scattered scat, overturned water troughs, and clawed-up dirt marked the area, evidence of the bear's natural behaviors. Focused on his task, Sven was unaware of the danger lurking just beyond his line of sight. The bear, having successfully escaped its holding pen, prowled into the main enclosure. For several moments it moved silently, watching Sven as he worked. The attack was swift and brutal. The bear charged at Sven, its immense body surging forward in a blur of fur and muscle. In an instant, it closed the gap, slamming into him with a force that sent him sprawling to the ground. Its claws tore into his arms as he instinctively raised them, ripping through fabric and skin as it bore down on him. The bear's jaws locked onto his shoulder, crunching through bone with terrifying ease, and it shook him like a rag doll, sending blood spraying across the enclosure. The staff, alerted by Sven's piercing screams, raced toward the chaos. Grabbing shovels, poles, and anything within reach, they charged the bear, yelling and swinging in a desperate attempt to force it back. The animal snarled, its massive frame undeterred by the frantic assault, its every movement exuding raw, uncontainable power. The staff's makeshift weapons were no match for the predator, which held its ground, its focus unbroken. Unable to subdue the bear by other means, a rifle was retrieved. With grim precision, the staff took aim. The crack of the gunfire echoed through the park as the bear was struck, collapsing with a final growl. The enclosure fell silent, save for the gasps of the staff as they rushed to Sven's crumpled form. When the staff finally reached Sven, the extent of his injuries was horrifying. His shoulder was mangled. His chest and back bore deep claw marks, and his head had struck the ground during the attack, causing significant trauma. Though barely alive, Sven was still breathing. The staff acted quickly, carrying him out of the enclosure and rushing him to the nearest medical facility. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Sven. His injuries were extensive, with severe trauma to his head and upper body. Despite their best efforts, Sven's condition deteriorated. Over the next 2 days, he remained in a coma, showing no signs of improvement. The damage to his brain was irreversible, and his vital signs continued to weaken. On August 6th, surrounded by his grieving family, Sven passed away. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Orsa Rovdjurspark and beyond. Investigations confirmed that all safety protocols had been followed, and no negligence was found on the part of the staff. The bear's escape was attributed to its ability to dig under the fence, a vulnerability that hadn't been adequately accounted for in the enclosure's design. In response, the park implemented significant changes to its infrastructure, reinforcing enclosures with concrete barriers that extended deeper underground. The incident also prompted other parks across the region to review their safety measures, ensuring that similar tragedies could be avoided. Sven's death was a devastating loss to his family, colleagues, and the wildlife community. Known for his kindness, determination, and passion for animals, he had been on the cusp of a bright future. His memory lives on at Orsa Rovdjurspark, where a memorial was erected in his honor, a poignant reminder of the risks faced by those who dedicate their lives to working with wildlife. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's a reminder that wild animals, no matter how fascinating, remain unpredictable and dangerous, whether they're kept in zoos or on private property. If you thought these stories were intense, just wait till you hear about Kellyanne Walls, who kept a bear as a pet on her property, a choice that led to a tragic and horrifying outcome. Click now to watch her story, and we'll see you there.